And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. On this podcast, we continue talking about the short run aggregate supply curve. And actually, what we've done so far in previous videos is we have looked at the moving along the aggregate demand curve, shifting the aggregate demand curve. We looked at moving along the short run aggregate supply curve, and now we're going to look at shifting the short run aggregate supply curve. So what I'm going to do here is to look at the determinants of shifting the short run aggregate supply curve, is I'm just going to lay them out in this on this chart, and I'm going to do that because we're not going to go through separately all the examples on the graph, because I think we should be pretty good. If you've watched a lot of my videos, you should be good at understanding these ideas of shifting the curves and so on. So really what this video is going to be more listing the things that are going to shift the short run aggregate supply curve, and then we'll actually put short run aggregate supply and aggregate demand together on future videos, and then we'll practice doing the shifting. So in this video, we're just going to focus on getting a list going and what kind of the rules are. So the first thing that shifts the short run aggregate supply curve would be wage rates. Now, we did talk about wage rates before. We talked about the real wage rate and how it's affected by changes in the price level. But here's the key, and this is a really, really kind of confusing concept. If the price level changes, and that changes wages, then it's a move along the curve concept. Why? Because the price change happened first. If you get a change in the price level, then that changes the real wage and moves you along the curve. Okay? Now, what's happening here with wage rates is that the price level didn't change. Wage rates changed for some reason other than a change in the price, and that's what causes a shift. So for example, maybe let me just go back and say that again. Wage rates are changing for some reason other than a change in the price level. For some reason other than a change in the price level, wage rates are changing. So for example, maybe unions grow stronger. If unions grow stronger, then that's going to tend to increase wage rates. And then what's going to happen to the shift of the curve? Well, it turns out that for companies, we're thinking about this from the supply side. From companies, if they have to pay higher wages, then they're not going to be able, it's going to be more costly to produce goods and services, and then therefore they're going to produce fewer goods and services. So if wage rates go up for some reason other than a change in prices, that's going to cause the curve to shift to the left. So this would be an increase in general wages in the economy will cause a leftward shift in the short run aggregate supply curve. On the other hand, a decrease in the wage rates, a decrease in wages in general throughout the economy will make it cheaper to produce goods and services, and that will shift the curve to the right. So I'm not saying lower wages is good. Don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that higher wages are bad. I'm just saying these are how they cause, these are the different directions of the shift as a result of those changes in wages. Now, non-labor inputs is the same thing. It's the same concept, only now instead of talking about wages, when I say non-labor inputs, I'm talking about land and capital, right? So really these together are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial skills, right? And the labor's captured up here, the land and capital is captured here, but the concept is the same. The concept is the same. If you get an increase in the cost of land and capital, then that's going to make it more costly to produce goods and services. Companies will reduce production, curve will shift to the left. On the other hand, if you get a decrease in the cost of land and capital, then that's going to make it cheaper to produce goods and services, and the curve is going to shift. The short run aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the right. All right, number 3, productivity. Productivity, first of all, just kind of a quick definition. Productivity is how fast we turn inputs into outputs. How fast do we turn inputs into outputs? Okay, it's the level of production per man hour worked. The level of production per man hour worked. So, for example, if you're on an island by yourself and you're trying to catch fish and you just have yourself and you just kind of walk into the bay and you try to grab them with your hands, you're going to be very unproductive. You're not going to catch many fish per man hour. But if you have a fishing rod or a net, then you're going to catch potentially a lot of fish per hour, and so that would be an increase in productivity. So anytime you get an increase in productivity and you can produce more goods and services per man hour, that's going to obviously shift your curve to the right. So increases in productivity are going to shift the curve to the right. And then, of course, the opposite of that, if you get a decrease in productivity for some reason, maybe if some of your tools depreciate over time, they stop working, you don't replace them, then your worker productivity is going to decline. The workers don't have as many tools to use. That's going to cause productivity to decrease, and that's going to cause your curve to shift into the left. If the workers have more tools and that increases their productivity, short and aggregate supply is going to shift to the right. All right, finally, the last one here is supply shocks. There's two things that can happen here. A supply shock, first of all, is typically like some sort of event in nature or weather, or the one other one, which is the big one, is a significant sudden change in the price of resources. And specifically, when we say that, what we typically mean is a significant and sudden change in the price of oil. So, for example, a positive supply shock. So that might mean that the price of oil, for whatever reason, decreases suddenly and significantly on world markets. Oil is used to produce just about all goods and services in some way, shape, or form, either to produce them or distribute them. And so if you get a big decrease in the price of oil, that means that companies can increase production and distribution. That's going to be a big positive supply shock. That's going to shift the short-run aggregate supply curve to the right. On the other hand, if you get a negative supply shock, so that could be something like a big increase in the price of oil, like happened back in the 1970s. You got this big increase in the price of oil, and that was a big negative supply shock, shifted the short-run aggregate supply curve in the left, because now, oil is used to produce everything, or at least most things, and now it becomes more costly to engage in production, and the supply curve shifts to the left. This also could be, like I said, weather events, things like that. Maybe there'd be a big earthquake or tsunami or whatever. Any of those kind of things would be a big negative supply shock and shift the short and aggregate supply curve into the left. Okay, so this was just a quick list of all the things that can shift that short and aggregate supply curve. We will talk about these in detail on future podcasts. We will do a lot of examples of shifting aggregate demand curves and shifting short and aggregate supply curves and how that works in the model. So we will talk about that on the future podcast. Thanks for joining me. This has been Mr. Hagan on another podcast, and we'll see you on the next podcast.